So I'm back with another video which is going to be a follow-up to the previous video that I had made, in which I had discussed how to go about constructing grids like these to start drawing vehicles in perspective. It goes without saying, but if you haven't watched that first part yet, be sure to do so and then come back to this one. Also, I have to start by giving some credit to Scott Robertson and his How to Draw book, from which I had learned most of the methods that I will be covering today. With that being said, let's get into it. So throughout the previous video, I had constructed these grids which I had at first modelled digitally to help with positioning each of the wheels and establishing an angle in perspective. In addition to that, I also covered how to do this freehand from scratch, and so we also have this which I'll be continuing today. Let's take a look at a few examples from Scott Robertson's book. Here you can see how he's boxed out the body of these cars, building on top of a grid that is similar to what we already have, and so that's what we need to do. Now, we could just freehand this and begin to draw boxes onto these grids we've already made. I mean, after all, we have an idea of where to direct our lines to the vanishing points now. But there are a few methods and ways of approaching this that can make doing that a lot easier. Now, obviously this is drawn in perspective, and in the last video I had demonstrated a technique to duplicate these squares across to find where to place this rear wheel. These wheels are drawn as ellipses within these bounding boxes. What I'm going to do is construct the side of this on an orthographic view, and I can do this because I know that there are 5 squares across, so that's what I'll draw out. The ellipses on a flat view like this will be circles within those squares, circles which are tangent to the square they are drawn in. Because this is a flat view, I don't need to rely on any duplication techniques because these are just measured the same size using my ruler. So now I have what I had previously drawn out in perspective, but on a flat orthographic view. If we think about this in reverse, this could easily be drawn in perspective, seeing as we would essentially be dealing with foreshortened squares. So in most cases it makes sense to create a flat orthographic side view of the vehicle that you want to draw in perspective first, before then drawing it in perspective. That way you can then plan out how you want it to appear by also drawing the body of the vehicle on a side view, like I'm going to do next. So now we are at a stage where I can decide how I want my car that I'm drawing to appear. Now, I'm not going to make this too complex like those more modern cars that you see with all of the curves and arcs, but I also don't want to make it an old boxy car. I'll go for something in between. I'm actually looking at an image of a taxi here, and so I'll try and draw the shape of that on a side view like this, but the important thing here is to outline the body of the car within some additional squares like these, because remember, these are easier to then transfer over in perspective. So in terms of the length of the car, I'm going to add an extra square at either end. This will be how far the car extends out at the front and at the rear. For the height of the vehicle's body, minus what Scott Robertson refers to as the greenhouse section, the section with all of the windows in, I'll make this about half a square height high. And you'll see how I outline the car within these in a moment. Now, on top of these squares around the middle here, this is where that greenhouse section will be. And so I'll draw in about 4 squares, let's say, above here. Now I can use these to outline the shape of the car that I'm drawing. Before you do that, you'll want to divide all of these squares up with some diagonal and midway lines, because these are the same construction lines we'll be drawing when we do this in perspective. You can even make additional divisions to use as guidelines. As you do this, if you want to make your life easier when it comes to drawing this in perspective, I'd try and make your outline meet and cross the dividing lines of these squares, because these act as points of reference as we draw in perspective, which you'll see in this next step. So that's a basic outline, the side profile of the car that I want to now draw. And so now let's go back to our drawing in perspective, and I'll put this side view in the corner of the screen. Now, as you've likely assumed, now I can add what I've just drawn onto the side of what I had drawn in perspective. However, there is another option that's sometimes preferable depending on the style of the vehicle you are drawing. For example, here Scott Robertson uses the orthographic view as a centre plane for the vehicle. The reason it makes more sense to do this here is because this car that he's drawing, like a lot of cars, involves a lot of curves and tapers in various directions. To deal with these curves, he makes use of a two-curve combo drawing method that he covers within the earlier pages of the book. Now, I don't want to keep adding to this and make it overly complex, and so I'll cover that approach in another video. For now, with this example, I'll make an effort to keep it somewhat simple. So there's my orthographic view in the corner, and I'm going to draw this onto my perspective view here. I'll start by adding the extra squares at the front and rear of this, again relying on that duplication technique to do so. Now that I have that, I need to add the half a square row across the top. Thankfully, the same duplication technique works here. You can see how I do this. This may seem a little confusing at first, but I'm just doing the same as before, that same duplication technique that I had shown in the first video, except here I do it upwards. I can project these lines back and also extend the ones that I need to. I'll also highlight some of these construction lines, seeing as there's a lot going on here. Finally, I need to add 4 squares here, so 2 squares in, and again I'll use that duplication method in this direction. Again, I do have to divide up some of these squares in order to duplicate them in the direction that I want to. Here I'll do this at the back as well, and then join this up like so. I can then extend up these lines for the squares. Once I have all of these drawn in, I'm going to divide them all up the same way as I have done on my side view, which you can see in the corner of the screen there. Once I have all of these squares drawn in, I can refer to my side view and create that same outline for the car. It's easy to do this because I'm essentially using the lines for the squares as a grid, seeing where the outline crosses them. So now I'm going to do the same again, but over onto the other side, and I'm aware at this point there's a lot of construction lines to deal with, but surprisingly, if you are the one drawing this out, it's easy to focus on the relevant sections, but it can look overwhelming when you see something like this. To draw this out on that side as well, I just repeated what I had just done on this side, but I had to look past all of those construction lines, which was a bit tricky. So now I have drawn this out at both sides, and I can start to connect these side views together, drawing some lines across to each point. For now I'll keep these lines straight, but as you work over this you'll want to curve your lines to look more natural. Again, it depends on the style of the vehicle you are drawing. I'm drawing out a taxi here, and so this card doesn't involve too many curves. Let's also remove those construction lines now. I've traced over what we've just done and drawn this out again. We are getting closer to finishing constructing this car. There's just a few more things left to do here. You'll notice that on most cars, this area here that Scott Robertson refers to as the greenhouse because of all the windows, you know, the sides of this typically taper inwards, which right now isn't the case due to us only drawing out the side views. So I'm going to taper in the sides of this now. This is fairly straightforward to do. I'll add some points slightly inwards at either side here, and then draw some lines back down to the bottom. I'll then transfer these points to the other side with some lines directed to that right vanishing point. I can then connect this up at the back. So at this stage I have the body of the vehicle blocked out, and now I can begin drawing in the details and outlining this with confidence, knowing that everything is accurately placed in perspective. As I mentioned earlier, as I do this, I make an effort to curve my lines slightly, using the edges of the block out as a guide. I do refer to some reference images as I do this to get a better idea of what I need to draw. As I do this, I make sure that all of these outlines head in the same direction as the lines for the block out, essentially converging to the vanishing points. This acts in a way that is similar to a wireframe, which you can then use as a guide. You're able to draw within that with more confidence. I think I might produce some grids that also include the blocked out bodies of the vehicles. That can be good to use as an underlay to then draw over. So now I'm done outlining this vehicle, this taxi, and here are the steps we had taken to get here. I also rendered this drawing in pencil, which you can see at the end. So there we go, that was, I suppose, an in-depth explanation of how to go about constructing vehicles in perspective. As I said, I will follow up with another video to demonstrate that 2 curve combo technique to draw some vehicles that involve more curves, but I'm making an effort to try and simplify these, what could be considered more complex methods. And so with that being said, I hope you found this helpful. If you did, then please leave a like, and I will see you in the next one. If you enjoyed the content I create, then do consider becoming a patron on Patreon. You will gain access to exclusive tutorials, study documents, real-time drawing footage and more. Plus you will also be supporting me in a more personal way. Other than that, thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you soon.